Far away in the distant reaches of our galaxy, there's a small rocky planet orbiting a G-type main sequence star. This planet has 3 natural satellites and makes a complete circuit around its star once every 430 Earth days. And 300 million years ago, a remarkable sequence of events was set into motion on this remote world. We've already explored 2 of the main lineages of alien organisms currently known to inhabit this planet, and now it's time to continue our journey through the various strange and bizarre denizens of Wallace 2. First, we come to Panopla Vita. The fossils we have of early representatives from this group indicate that they are likely the sister clade to Celinadont, and started out as largely slow-moving, heavily armoured filter feeders. But in the last 300 million years, they've diversified enormously, just like the other groups we've seen so far, giving rise to a wonderful assortment of captivating organisms. First, we have the group Molus Emilia. These fairly basal organisms are all aquatic like their ancient ancestors, and retain the bony exoskeletons to varying extents. The genus Molus Emilis is still heavily armoured, has developed a large keel-like limb for stability, and possesses 2 specialised proboscises for filter feeding. Similar such structures are known in the fossils of the Panoplovitan ancestor. The spade-nosed wombus is less heavily armoured and feeds by searching with its modified central proboscis in sand, while the closely related Pluto stega genus specialises as a cleaner of larger organisms, feeding on debris and parasites found on the bodies of other aquatic aliens. Close to Molus Emilia is the clade Comedera membrata, which includes 2 living taxa. The Silvertonya is a meter-long serpentine panoplovitan that feeds on microorganisms and lives in groups, utilising their defensive horns to deter potential predators. The related Clavis genus has also extended the number of limbs it possesses, like the Silvertonya with its homologous fin structures, and filters small organisms from sand. Remarkably, Clavis is actually capable of leaping out of the water and spending a short amount of time on land in order to avoid predators. However, it must return to the water before its gas exchange surfaces dry out. Next we come to Pavia, which includes 2 species, both of which are also native to the diverse shallow sea ecosystem surrounding the previously mentioned Isla Inferno. Both the Pulvis genus and Loricatorum are fairly small organisms that retain a good deal of protective exoskeleton. One lineage within this current aquatic panoplovitan radiation has given rise to some of the largest organisms inhabiting the oceans of this planet, Mantica titania. The 2 taxa within this group, the pouched titan barnacle and Nihilasucta colossus, or colossal suck feeder, are both enormous in size. However, their distinct morphologies hint at a once diverse group that seems to have become reduced in diversity in the last few million years, leaving just these 2 species alive. Both organisms are filter feeders, using their long filament-covered proboscises to trap tiny planktonic organisms. Next we have Geo Sirena, another small group with only 2 member taxa, Geophage squidwardii and the Wallati. Geophage uses its proboscises to sift through the sand on the seafloor and has sensitive antennae to tell when danger may be nearby. The Wallati, like Geophage, retains some armour on its back, though to a lesser extent, and inhabits murky waters in swamp regions, using its feeler proboscises to navigate and its feeding proboscis to pick up and consume polyspeculates. After this group is Squilla vivoidea, containing a diverse array of surviving members. The most basal organism is the genus Squilla vividae, a widespread small aquatic alien genus with impressive spiky armour for defence and display. This is another example of Pseudojaws convergently evolving, like many members of the Chelinantids and Speculates, with the first limb pair and parts of the anterior body section forming structures to aid in feeding. The striking feathery feeding appendages are used to filter and catch small particles of food for consumption. The other Squilla vivoideans, the genus Squillacorpion and the garden whale, possess some very interesting morphologies, with the garden whale converging on the giant filter-feeding lifestyle, though remarkably they also seem to be capable of echolocation, in addition to being symbiotic with microscopic polyspeculates that live on their wing-like limbs. Squillacorpion, meanwhile, walks along the beds of waterways and oceans, as well as free swimming, filter feeding for most of the year but then targeting larger organisms during the breeding period, climbing up nearby bone trees and piercing other dispeculates with their modified proboscis, injecting either digestive enzymes or even their eggs into the other organism. Next we arrive at the small grouping Robinia, containing a single taxon, the remarkable Ribin. These aquatic panoplovitans have a fascinating life cycle involving starting off as deep-sea dwellers that feed on potassium-containing rocks, before storing it in specialised organs running beneath the dorsal balloon-like structures. Reactions with water cause the balloon organs to be filled with H2 gas, and the gas is also distributed to other parts of the body, enabling the Ribin to then switch to a filter-feeding lifestyle as it floats in the water column. After the Ribin is the clade Cura Pridea. The most basal member of this grouping is a taxon called Pavia, a small shoaling organism that is a very important ecological player in the Vadum-Mary Shallow Sea, as they're a food source for a lot of the marine Dispeculates living there. The more derived members include the remarkable floating whale, which has modified a large internal air sac, possibly homologous with the balloon organs seen in the ribin, and with the aid of the relatively low surface gravity is able to leave the water and float just above the surface, filter feeding with its proboscises that are dragged through the water. Closely related is the Garida, a Panoplovitan that has taken the opposite approach and adapted for a niche it fills deep underwater, where it has reduced most of its bony exoskeleton and no longer filter feeds, instead luring in small prey with the use of bioluminescent tips on their proboscises. Next up is the last of the aquatic Panoplovitan clades, Communi Cetacea. Appearing to be ancestrally aquatic given its phylogenetic position, Communi Cetacea also includes some secondarily aerial organisms too, the common and sky nymphus. These creatures are often seen swarming in great numbers, seeking out prey that they land on before piercing their skin with their central proboscis and feeding on their internal circulatory fluids. The other member of this clade, Barbocetus giganteus, commonly called the mustache whale, has evolved along a very different line, remaining in the ancestral aquatic environment but also converging on the large filter-feeding body plan that can be seen in other groups. These beasts can grow to enormous dimensions, as much as 50 meters long in some cases, as they don't seem to ever stop growing. The filaments on their outer proboscises are bioluminescent, apparently performing roles in hunting by attracting prey, but also in communication between individuals. Next, we move on to the more derived, secondarily terrestrial radiation of lineages that's found within the Panoplovita clade. Starting with Silvertonya, this grouping includes just one known taxon, Wallace's Silverton, a large, slow-moving organism that produces a sticky, tar-like substance enabling all sorts of material, including other Wallacean organisms, to become attached to it and therefore providing a miniature movable ecosystem. Remarkably, there's even a particular species of Ambulospeclid that so far has not been found to live anywhere else other than on these Panoplovitans. Another clade of terrestrial Panoplovitans is Halooo Fraga, which contains 3 extant taxa. The most basal is the genus Ossifragacorn, a large, heavily armoured creature with 6 limbs, the front pair having been reduced. The other Haloofragaconians are the closely related Heliotaurus and Eremita, both of which have reduced their limbs further from the apparent basal condition for this clade of 6 limbs and now use just 2 in order to locomote. Heliotaurus still retains large bristled proboscises used to filter polyspeculate spores and other small organisms from the air, while Eremita, a desert-adapted organism, has developed small tooth-like structures in its central proboscis to feed with. Next, we come to the clade Armour Titania, another grouping of similar, heavily armoured terrestrial Panoplovitans. 2 taxa are currently recognised in this group, the genus Armatura and a creature known as the Horned Titan. Both are large-bodied and retain a great deal of bony exoskeleton. However, they feed in very different ways. While Armatura wades through shallow water and filter feeds, the Horned Titan uses its proboscises to capture larger prey. Additionally, Armatura appears to have fused its front pairs of limbs over the course of their evolutionary history, since they only possess 4 limbs in contrast with the Horned Titan's 6. After that clade is Paludiruptia, an interesting grouping that also contains 2 notable taxa, Christocerygnath ruptus and Procerus arcus, the marsh walker. Both retain a significant amount of the ancestral bony exoskeleton but have adapted to very different niches since they split from their common ancestor. Christocerygnath is a large apex predator that inhabits subtropical forested floodplains, chasing down prey and using its large saber-like projections on its pseudojaws to puncture through the bony armour of its prey items. On the other hand, the marsh walker is a relatively slow-moving, tall organism that feeds on polyspeculates such as the marsh cabbage, utilising the pincer-like claws on its front limbs in order to access its internal, edible tissues. Finally, we arrive at Flumen cuniculia. These highly derived Panoplovitans have almost entirely reduced the external bony armour of their ancestors, instead converging on the condition seen in many Ambulospeclids and others, in which the internal cartilaginous skeleton has ossified and is now composed of bone, essentially switching the external bony skeleton for an internal one. The most basal Flumen cuniculian is Flumen ambulaticus, commonly called the water strider, an inhabitant of deep rivers in tropical forests that slowly walk along the riverbed and use their larger central prehensile proboscises to feed, while the outer proboscises are used as sensory organs to detect the vibrations of potential prey in the water. Another member of the clade is the Great Plains burrower, which feeds on low-growing polyspeculates and possesses some external bony armour in the form of protective spikes that aid in deterring predators. These organisms are highly social and are known to create large underground tunnel systems. Finally, there's Octopod ruminantia, the striped swamp camel. These Panoplovitans live in the swamps and forests of the planet and feed on the polyspeculates found in these environments. Particularly alert and cautious creatures, Octopod will quickly dash into deeper waters to escape danger, being very capable swimmers, and they also have some remarkable display structures, such as an inflatable balloon-like structure on the head. Well then, that brings us to the end of the Panoplovitans. Yet again, this is an incredibly diverse grouping of alien organisms that has continually radiated in all sorts of fascinating ways from their armoured, marine, filter-feeding ancestors and adapted to an astonishing variety of the unique niches offered on Wallace 2. Along with the other groups we've looked at, the Panoplovitans are a true evolutionary success story. Now we come to the last of the Dispeculates clades, the Gumfirebeans. The fossil record of this clade from about 300 million years ago seems to indicate that at least some of the early members of the lineage were highly predatory in nature, with large, fearsome-looking elongated rostra thought to have been used in piercing the bony armour of their prey. However, like the other major Dispeculates lineages we've encountered, the Gumfirebeans have diversified and radiated like crazy in the time since these early representatives, and convergence between Gumfirebean lineages is rampant throughout the clade. These organisms appear to have taken to the land on multiple occasions, with several waves of invasion at different points in their evolutionary history again being a testament to the remarkable morphological plasticity and adaptability of the Wallacian aliens, as well as the capacity of the niches present in the diverse environments of the planet itself. So let's begin our exploration of the Gumfirebeans. We'll start with a clade called Panzer Carrier, a very basal grouping that contains a single taxon, Panzer Carrier. This organism has remained aquatic, though it favours freshwater, and has adapted to become a specialised detritivore, using its spiny proboscises to rake through sediment on riverbeds. There aren't any other living Gumfirebeans that seem to be very closely related to the Panzer Carrier, and as a result, our astrobiologists have determined that it's probably a representative of a very early offshoot of these aliens. After Panzer Carrier, we come to Lattipiscia, a very large and diverse clade that contains a variety of different creatures. This is an interesting grouping as it includes one of the first examples of terrestrially adapted Gumfirebeans, Safale Draco. However, despite the Lattipiscians as a whole being fairly basal, the adaptations of Safale Draco to life on land appears to have occurred relatively recently, as a closely related aquatic genus, Galeopistris, demonstrates a lot of similar anatomy, suggesting that they didn't split from one another very long ago. The other Lattipiscians are still aquatic though, such as the Pseudomandibulatidae family, a diverse grouping that fill a variety of niches and that possess a convergent Pseudojaw, as well as the closely related Lepidopiscus and Prophognathus genera, which feature cartilaginous external body armour in addition to segments of bony armour and Pseudojaws that are likely homologous with those of other Lattipiscians. The clade Celinadontia is next, which contains the taxon Celinadont piscator, another example of an independent transition to terrestrial life. This organism is still semi-aquatic, but with limbs that feature both bony endo and exoskeleton, enabling it to support its weight on land. Ceta Fluminia is another very diverse grouping of relatively basal Gumfirebeans, containing such members as Caelusax celestivata, an aquatic organism that inhabits marshlands and swamps, but has converged on a behaviour seen in several other Dispeculates lineages, in which they're capable of leaping from the water and gliding with their fins for short distances, with the aid of air sacs filled with gases located on the sides of their bodies. The related Debellator flumen appears to have independently converged on this behaviour too, but doesn't use gas sacs. It seems the similar overall body plan of these organisms was particularly facilitative of semi-aerial habits, considering its prevalence in this clade. The Cetafluminian Vorta dorsus has adapted to a very different niche however, and lives in shallow bodies of water, occasionally making journeys over land with the aid of their supportive limbs and internal bony skeleton. This brings us to Notanikia, the first example of a truly fully terrestrial radiation of Gumfirebeans. This is another grouping that's highly diverse in the members it contains, the disparity of which indicates a rich evolutionary history for the clade. The most basal taxon is the Leonyx, a large apex predator of tundra and subarctic environments that uses the bony protrusions on its head to pierce its prey, and a pseudojaw to force the armour or skin of its prey open, then using a single beaked proboscis to feed on the organism. Also in Notanikia is the Felidae, a jungle-living colourful Gumfirebean that hunts among the bone trees, as well as the southern Rasodon, the last surviving member of a larger lineage that's only known from fossils, which prowls the coastlines of southern Media Insula on the lookout for anything it can crush with its well-developed pseudojaws. Next we come to Amplectenda. This is an incredibly diverse grouping of terrestrial Gumfirebeans, demonstrating a huge variety of anatomies and interesting behaviours. The most basal Amplectendan is a creature called Amplectendo, a big-bodied, slow-moving organism that utilizes the sharpened saw-like structure on its head to cut into bone trees and access their nutritious insides. Also in the group is Chimera gracilis, a wolf-sized scavenger and hunter with 2 elongated sensory proboscises and a central feeding one, as well as the fuzzbuckets, the family Celestinictidae. This is an interesting group, as a hairy integument has evolved in these organisms, similar to the integument seen in some ambular speculates. The central proboscis has now become a bird-like beak, while the outer ones have reduced significantly over time and now serve as sensory whiskers. The fuzzbuckets are a widespread and fairly generalist family that can be found in all kinds of environments across Wallace 2. Another amplictendon is also known to possess hairy integument, Trirencoatus, suggesting that this is a homologous feature with the fuzzbuckets. Trirencoatus lives in polar forests and wetlands and is a proficient ambush hunter. Related to this organism is the family Sextrapodes lacerta, which, though they descend from a true terrestrial radiation of Gumfirebeans, have actually become semi-aquatic again. This may be an example of an atavism, or evolutionary throwback, especially since one member of the group, Pescatara, reproduces and spends a good deal of its life cycle in water. Crystal lacerta is more terrestrial than its relative, but still hunts in the water, utilizing their well-developed pseudojaws. After that group, we arrive at Solonantia. This is a clade of organisms that have taken to subterranean habitats, and as such a reduction in limbs and relatively worm-like body plan can be witnessed in the members of the group. The more basal witch's parasol has a complex life cycle in which the larvae are burrowing worm-like organisms, though they retain some limbs, while the adults are sessile and spend their lives half buried in sand. The evolution of much more worm-like burrowers in the more derived Solonantians might, according to some astrobiologists, therefore be an example of neoteny, in which juvenile features were retained in the adults, eventually leading to speciation occurring. The soil swimmer is one of these other burrowing organisms, an ambush hunter that detects prey through vibrations passing through the soil. Another example is Nyx anguis, which is similar in many ways to the soil swimmer but inhabits higher latitudes. Moving on, we come to Kharkov Acequia. This clade contains just one known living taxon, Kharkov testudines, a heavily armoured beast with pseudojaws that opportunistically feeds on organisms inhabiting coastal regions. After this is specular bestia, a grouping that all share an elongated bony spine on their head which has been exapted for a variety of uses. In the glass wing drifter, an organism that's capable of gliding for short distances, this spine is used to puncture the outer bony armour of polyspeculates, enabling them to feed on the internal fluids, while in Ixodidasicate bestia it's used for a similar purpose but on Dispeculates instead. These small 30 cm long parasites can be found in groups as large as 100 individuals on a single host. The knife head is a much larger, highly social specular bestian that has a complex sinus system in their skull and an inflatable air sac underneath used in intraspecific communication, while the elongated spine is again used to inflict puncture wounds on their prey, allowing them to feed. Doryplosauria is next, a large grouping of terrestrial Gumfirebeans of mostly big-bodied predators with well-developed, powerful crushing pseudojaws. The majority of these organisms possess 6 limbs in total, however the more derived members have reduced 1 pair and instead now only have 4 limbs. The Tridoprobosauria family is one example of Doryplosaurians, which contains ambush hunters that utilize a harpoon-like proboscis to capture prey. Also in the group is Zeno Carnifex, a solitary ambush hunter that lurks in the tropical jungles of Wallace 2, filling a similar niche to leopards or jaguars on Earth. The closely related Alipardus lochysauria and Squamia convolvens lupus have both reduced the central limb pair. While in Alipardus they are still used for grasping onto and stabilizing prey items, in Squamia they appear to just be vestigial, reducing in size and strength as the other limbs became better adapted for running. Both creatures are still large, armoured and ferocious predatory Gumfirebeans. Finally are the 4-limbed Doryplosaurians, Tridentigerovenator rex and Gumfiomorph skiensis. Tridentigerovenator appears to have developed a very unique and heavily constructed exoskeleton, while Gumfiomorph is adapted to patrolling the swamps and marshes of the planet as it searches for aquatic prey. Moving now onto one of the other main lineages of Gumfirebeans, we come to the early diverging group called the Ornithosmilids. These creatures have clearly had an extensive evolutionary history that's largely obscured by a poor fossil record, and are very unique Gumfirebeans. They're very widespread about the planet and are relatively opportunistic as well as aerial, enabling them to colonize all sorts of different environments. There's a great deal of diversity within the group itself though, and they also appear to have independently converged on a hairy integument, like other Gumfirebeans we've looked at. Next is another clade of flight-capable Gumfirebeans, Ichthyowestonia. The most basal taxon in this group, Avimaris westonium, descended from the aerial common ancestor of the Ichthyowestonian plus ornithosmilid clade, but has actually now returned to the water, though it is still able to leap out and glide for short distances. The clade Dracolodontidia is also included. These aliens are aerial predators that are widespread across Wallace too, but unlike the more derived members of Ichthyowestonia, only their middle two limb pairs are used as flight surfaces, with the outer pairs enabling them to be competent ground stalkers too. They also possess some hairy integument, which is likely homologous with the integument of the ornithosmilids. The closely related Gomphogopteryx and Ichthyopteryx are more examples of this group, but while Ichthyopteryx utilizes all 8 of its limbs as flight surfaces, in Gomphogopteryx all but one of the paired wings have become reduced. Also in the clade is Papiliocornus magnum, another furry Gomphiobian with a well-developed pseudojaw that's been observed to drop hard food items from great heights in order to crack them open, and the group Pterolocarididae, a very diverse lineage of aerial organisms that fill many of the niches occupied by various birds on Earth. After that grouping, we come to Pridea Regina, another diverse taxon of terrestrial Gomphiobians. The most basal member is an organism known as the spoiler queen, a highly sexually dimorphic creature in which the females are large, heavily armoured predators while the males are much smaller, flight-capable organisms that protect the eggs and also aid in detecting potential prey for the females. Exipteryx is another relatively basal member, an agile aerial predator. More derived Pridea reginans include the ancestrally aerial but now secondarily terrestrial Blue Victory, tall creatures that inhabit the eastern islands of Veda Mary and use their tough jaws to crack open hard exoskeletons. Other derived secondarily terrestrial members are Pterocetus gigas, large aliens that use their robust beak-like jaws to push through the soils of Wallacian forests looking for underground food sources, and Simialiena dulcimama, highly social arboreal Gomphiobians that consume the gum resin of Florinumbra bone trees. Next we come to Electra pistrida, a grouping of mostly still aquatic Gomphiobians, though some are terrestrial. The most basal organism within this clade is a creature called the electric daggerfish, a fascinating organism due to the fact that it doesn't appear to have changed in many ways from the earliest known Gomphiobian ancestors, retaining a number of similar features and making this a true living fossil. The family Chimaetroiani is also included within this lineage, and this is a very diverse clade indeed, containing a large number of taxa that are all adapted for different lifestyles. These range from the boulderback, a huge semi-sessile organism that inhabits ponds and lakes and forms a symbiotic relationship with small polyspeculates, to the goblin walker, a social herding Gomphiobian that migrates to different areas, and to the vampire beetle, a predator and parasite that lures nocturnal Dispeculates towards it using reflective pads on its limbs. There are a whole host of other amazing organisms in this large family too. Other Electropistridans include Insidious dente, an ambush hunter that dwells in swamps and uses its large pseudojaws to capture prey, and Ambiguostoma hydroensis, another ambush predator of estuaries and slow-flowing rivers that, remarkably, possesses a proboscis that appears to look like a floating fruit, aiding in baiting prey. Up next is the clade Xenopleurodontia, another lineage of mostly aquatic Gomphiobians. It includes such creatures as Celeria, a fast-swimming creature that impales its armoured prey on its bony rostrum spike, as well as Telemnasus ducks, a social group-hunting organism that also utilises the large blade-like structure on their heads to slash at their prey. Another Xenopleurodontian is Gladiogomphius, a fast and predatory genus, one species of which is capable of leaping and gliding above the water's surface for short distances. Also included in the lineage is Styriminami, a heavily armoured deep-sea scavenger that swims slowly and feeds on the carcasses of large marine organisms that fall to the sea floor. After this grouping, we arrive at Thoramphibia, another of the aquatic Gomphiobian lineages. Tesca amphibiarum is an example from this clade, and is a small amphibious organism that lives in symbiosis with an ambulospeculates. Also in the group is the Wallacian lamprey, a parasitic organism living in northern waters. They no longer possess any bony exoskeleton and use a modified proboscis as a piercing organ in order to access the internal circulatory fluids of its prey. Next is the group Ostrigonia, composed of more aquatic Gomphiobians. The Ostrigonian Osteosuchus is an ambush predator that submerges itself in sand, giving the appearance of a deceased organism, before quickly striking out at unfortunately close creatures with its powerful pseudojaws. Os oris is another aquatic predator in the lineage, utilising its modified outer proboscises as sensory organs to detect the presence of prey which it then dispatches with its pseudojaws. Titanoangulus is an Ostrigonian that has adapted to become a massive filter-feeding organism like many ambulospeculates and Panoplovitans have too. These creatures move incredibly slowly, creating a current with their huge wing-like fins which pushes planktonic organisms towards their proboscises, which have become multiple spindly and sticky structures to trap the microorganisms. Now we move on to Giraffe Piscatorial, a clade of derived Gumfirebeans that have again independently evolved terrestrial capabilities, with some members being semi-aquatic and some being fully land-dependent. The Giraffe Piscator genus is one of the most basal members, and these creatures spend a lot of time on beaches, where the males seek out territories which they then defend against others and hunt on the water by launching their pointed proboscises at prey. Ursus is a more terrestrially capable taxon, however these organisms live in a similar way to earth hippos, lying in wait underwater in river systems and lakes for prey to come close to them, before launching their proboscises at them and utilising their powerful pseudojaws. Plumethong oslug is another member of this group and is a large semi-aquatic filter feeder with a huge unhinging pseudojaw that allows small items of food to be collected. Additionally, the intertester is a social creature that begins life as a parasite inside larger aliens before emerging and developing to fill an opportunistic niche, feeding on bone trees, polyspeculates and small dispeculates. Next is one of the other major lineages of Gumfirebeans, and we'll start with Candan Taizo. These are also aquatic organisms, and include taxa such as Algamimus flossetus, a small creature that possesses a proboscis which has evolved to mimic a certain kind of celestophyte, and by holding the structure just above the water, it is able to lure small prey items towards it. The clade Simulcochlea is also included within this group and contains a variety of taxa known from fossil remains. However, one of these genera is still alive today, Cochleocetus. This is a huge filter-feeding organism that's very social and can be found in a few different locations around the Wallacean oceans. Moving now to Tegra impeta, this is another clade that has independently evolved terrestrial capabilities and includes such organisms as Tegra impetus, a creature that feeds on bone trees and has a symbiotic relationship with a small species of celestophyte that grows on its armoured back. Additionally, there's Cranium mimus, a cursorial social organism that can be found in the temperate regions of the planet, as well as Osler ricati, a tall predator that hunts in small groups and uses its elongated, serrated bony head protrusion to inflict damage on the bony exoskeleton of its prey, much like the ancestral aquatic Gumfirebeans. Finally is Entomogracilia. This is another incredibly diverse clade of terrestrial Gumfirebeans, with the genus Herocritus being the most basal member. This organism displays a behaviour comparable to the black heron of Earth, creating a shadow over shallow bodies of water using its arms, and then utilising its sharp beak-like structure to impale prey. Encyrostrum platygracilis is another entomogracilian and is a wetlands-dwelling opportunistic generalist which will use its spade-like bone structure on the head, which is filled with electroreceptors, to detect electrical impulses from small organisms in the murky water. Finally, there's Pantheramimus ignaticus, or the Wallacean dagger cat, a large-bodied, intelligent predator that's reduced its exoskeleton, has modified two of its proboscises into fearsome fang-like structures, and utilises a powerful pseudojaw to dispatch the unfortunate aliens it preys upon. So that brings us to the end of the Gumfirebeans, as well as the end of part 2. As you can see, the evolutionary history of the Gumfirebeans has been a fascinating tale of radiation and adaptation, with remarkable accounts of convergence across the many different lineages. Again, I'd like to apologise for not being able to include everyone's aliens or to spend as much time as I'd like discussing each entry, but there are just so many to get through it's unfortunately impossible to do justice to each one. We've still got a great many Wallacean aliens to get through in part 3, including the fascinating walking plant-like organisms, and the celestophytes which are so important in sustaining the many ecosystems on the planet. So I hope you'll join us for the third and hopefully final part of the Wallace 2 project once it's done. Anyway, thank you so much for watching this video. I really hope you enjoyed it and learned something new. A big thank you to our Patreon supporters, especially our Dinosaur tier supporters Jan Owen, Corey Peterson, George Vojtek, Persian Boy, Mayor's World, Jacob Stewart, Nicole Bueno, Pastor, Mark Fawn, Dominic Bathy, Harry Everett and Alex Hawke. If you would like to find out more about our world, its history, and the wonderful life that surrounds us all, please feel free to subscribe to the channel if you think we deserve it, and if you would like to see more from us.